Skarner nerfs have absolutely gutted the champion. Misfortune is back on top of the ADC meta, and who do you think is the most underrated champ for 14.13? Let us know in the comments below. And did you know with a 55% win rate, it takes 150 games on average to go up just one rank? Increase your win rate by just 5%, and that time is cut in half to only 80 games. This is the power of SkillCapped. Each course offers a win rate increase that is just a click away. Learn what took challenger players 10 years and just 10 minutes. We supercharge your rank gains with real results. Click the link in the description below now to get the rank you've always dreamed of. So if we start things off by covering the most impactful top lane adjustments of 14.13, Skarner is now gone from meta. Max health damage from Q dropping from 15 to 10% was such a huge nerf, not to mention the mana cost increase on Q as well. With Skarner's Q being his main damage source and ability he uses to poke in lane, the nerfs have heavily impacted his viability for solo Q. We had moved Skarner down into A tier for the pre-patch tier list, but he's in need of a push further down for mid-patch now that we've seen just how detrimental the changes have turned out, so we're moving the Scorpion into C tier. So other than Skarner falling off a cliff, the top lane meta remains pretty stable as we reach the midway point of the patch. We accidentally had Gangplank placed in the top lane C tier for the pre-patch tier list, so we're adjusting him up into B to where we intended to have him. The buff Gangplank received this patch was somewhat impactful as his win rate has gone up about 1%, but it wasn't quite enough to push him into joining that upper percentile of top lane champs. If players would adjust to the new optimal rune setup for Gangplank, it would definitely lead to a better analytical showing. Most players are either taking Grasp or First Strike, but Fleet Footwork is winning way more. It's Precision Primary with Inspiration Secondary, which is a page we are seeing a lot more of as of recent, especially on ADCs. Fleet with Absorb Life and Biscuits gives GP some nice sustain, and Jack of all trades is good value early on, as you only need a Doran's Blade, Glowing Moat, and a Dagger to gain the bonus 10 AD. All the other top lane changes for 14.13 have played out to expectations, as Kennen is now slotted into an A tier spot, while Gragas ended up losing his S tier status and is now in A tier as well. Zac ended up losing no win rate at all as a result of his nerf, so our decision to not drop him down the tier list was the correct play. There was also the very minor Pantheon buff to his W damage, and as expected, Panth did not gain any significant strength from it. The big story coming out of the jungle for 14.13 has revolved around the death of a few AP junglers. Karthus' nerf may have seemed light on paper, but the damage lost on Q has resulted in a 3% loss in win rate. With many other champs, losing just 3 damage on their main damage tool wouldn't really matter that much, but the reason a change like this affects Karthus so much more is because his Q is such a spammable ability. For a spell without an actual cooldown, that 3 damage you're missing adds up extremely fast while you're clearing your jungle especially. And since Karthus is a jungler who wants to full clear pretty much every single game, this nerf to his clear speed is a big reason to why he's lost so much strength. So when it comes down to AP junglers, Lilia is now miles ahead of Karthus priority-wise, as we'll be shifting Karthus into the C tier for mid-patch. The changes to Electrocute and Dark Harvest have been interesting to track as the patches rolled out, and Nidalee is one champ who seems to have a new optimal rune setup. With Nidalee being such an early game reliant jungler, the rune that has been seeing the most success on her in 14.13 is actually Electrocute. Dark Harvest and Conquer are still more popular, but because Electro was buffed so heavily in the early game, it's fitting in really nicely on Nid. You have more damage and a lower cooldown on Electrocute now, so it's perfect for Nidalee to help her snowball more reliably. Here's a look at the full rune setup as you're taking Domination for primaries and then grabbing Precision for secondaries. If you put the time into Nidalee and can play her at a good level, then she's in a solid spot right now, as you'll find her in the jungle A tier. So having a look at the jungle tier list, it was a relatively tame patch, so not much has shifted in the grand scheme of things. Lilia remains as the lone OP tier jungler, and look to take advantage of her while you can, because Riot has thrown some nerfs on the PBE that will be headed to live servers for 14.14. It wasn't just top lane Skarner who was decimated by the nerfs this patch, as jungle Skarner is in just as bad of a spot now. Jungle didn't end up losing as much strength as top, but that doesn't really say much when you take into account top lane Skarner is now one of the weakest champs in the game. Jungle Skarner is being moved further down into the C tier for mid-patch. The most notable shift for jungle this patch is definitely the fact that Karthus and Talia are now absent from meta. Both champs have been quite high priority ever since the addition of Blackfire Torch, but their time as powerful carries has come to an end in 14.13. We noted in the pre-patch tier list that we'd be keeping a close eye on how Dark Harvest performs on certain mages, and Lux is looking like one of the bigger winners. Dark Harvest had its damage per stacks increased, however its base damage was lowered, so champions that have a relatively easy time farming stacks benefit much more from the rune now. With Lux, she has the ability to farm stacks in lane due to the long range poke, and then once she gets R, it's even easier to get those stacks rolling in. The rune page leading to the best results for Lux in 14.13 revolves around running Domination primary and then grabbing Sorcery for secondaries. Lux had already been been one of the better solo queue mages in recent patches, and this indirect buff to Dark Harvest has solidified her spot in the S tier even more. We're seeing pros really gravitate towards ADCs in the mid lane right now, and the best that you can play for solo queue is Tristana. Ezreal and Corki are two other ADCs that are being played quite often in mid lane right now, but Trist just has way more agency over both of them. It's so much easier to succeed with Tristana, as she doesn't really rely on landing a single skill shot, and her pushing power is superior. You've got to be way more immaculate mechanically in order to win with Ezreal or Corki, whereas with Trist, there's nothing mechanical that will hold you back, so it's just about playing off your power spikes and punishing enemies' mispositioning. Trist has the ability to strike as early as level 2, which is another factor that gives her the edge up in solo queue. Being able to force an all-in that early on in lane and generate an advantage helps to set you up really well in winning lane. Even if you don't kill the enemy, just having that health advantage so that you can freely do what you want in lane opens up so much for yourself and your jungler. So for Tristana's tier list placement, we're going to be giving her a bump up from A into S for mid-patch. So for the mid-patch tier list, OP tier is looking the same as where we had it for pre-patch, with Naafiri and Vex on top. Brand nerfs have played out to our general expectations as the champ has lost a bit of strength, but not to the extent to where you should stop playing him at all, as he's still a phenomenal S tier option. Lissandra and Orianna were the two mid laners who got buffed this patch, and they've both seen an increase in strength, matching what we expected. Ori is no longer in the bottom percentile of mid lane champs any longer, as she's now in the B tier, while Lissandra is a really solid A tier pickup in the correct spots. With that Lissandra W buff where it's now on a 2-second shorter cooldown at rank 1, she's finding a ton of success into both Yasuo and Yone, along with most other melee mids. The big change down in the bot lane for 14.13 was centered around Miss Fortune, as she's back in a great spot for solo queue. Not only was the champ directly buffed, there's a new build that players have gravitated towards that's adding even more power. Bloodthirster Rush is back on MF and winning more than anything else right now. BT has even better synergy with Miss Fortune than most champions because of the way her W movement speed interacts with shields. Normally, whenever you take damage, the movement speed boost from W drops off immediately. If you take damage while shielded though, and for as long as the shield does not break, you won't be losing the movement speed from W. So the shield from Bloodthirster not only makes MF more difficult to take down, but keeps her a little more mobile as well. With Barrier now in meta as the best secondary summoner spell for ADCs, it's just a ludicrous amount of shielding in general once you pick up that Bloodthirster. The optimal core build that you'll want to be running on Miss Fortune consists of the BT Rush into Essence Reaver 2nd and Infinity Edge 3rd. Rune Page has also begun to shift as of recent, with more high elo MF players liking Conqueror, and it's even winning more than Press the Attack. So for Miss Fortune's tier list placement, we'll be giving her an added push up the tier list for mid-patch, going from A into S tier. So other than Miss Fortune moving up the tier list, all the other ADC changes were either neutral or negative. OP tier is now going to be locked down by Jinx and Kai'Sa, as they are cut above all else right now. Barrier coming back into meta has been great for Kai'Sa. The level 6 skirmish power of Kai'Sa just feels super nuts right now, especially if she's paired with an engaged support. You have the shield from R and then the shield from Barrier, which just gives the champ the ability to force fights really well. We were optimistic that the Varus changes would lead to on-hit Varus moving into a good spot, but the changes have just weakened the strength of the champ as a whole. On-hit is definitely much better as lethality is pretty dead, but both builds have become weaker due to the changes, and we'll be moving Varus down to C tier for mid-patch. Kalista and Xayah were the other two ADCs adjusted, and the changes have played out to expectations. Xayah did not gain very much power at all as a result of her buffs, while Kalista is now the weakest solo queue ADC that you can choose. Riot's gonna have to do something about this Warmog's rush on melee supports because it's absolutely taking over the meta right now. Alistar is one of the best Warmog's users and is being moved up into the support S tier for mid-patch. Alistar has better synergy than most supports with Warmog's because of his passive. Ali's passive heal scales off his max health, so he not only gets so much tankier, but also provides his teammates with a massive heal by building Warmog's. Now, it's not just the Warmog's rush that a lot of high elo and pro supports have been liking recently, as support item upgrade priority has been shifting as well. Nautilus in specific is one support that many pros have been loving with Bloodsong as their item upgrade. Bloodsong makes a lot of sense on Naut because whenever he lands a hook, he's guaranteed to land an auto attack right after and proc the bonus damage from Bloodsong. You already have enough tankiness from building Warmog's anyways, so swapping out Celestial Opposition for Bloodsong when running this build works great. As for Naut's tier list placement, it shouldn't be much of a surprise he's up in the S tier with many of the other Warmog's users. So for the support tier list, it's the same theme as we've been working with for the past few patches now. Warmog's supports are dominating the meta as Alistar, Braum, Nautilus, Leona, Rel, Maokai, and Poppy are all incredibly strong with the item. If you're looking for a champ to use as a counter to these melee supports, both Nami and Karma are two pretty good options. Nami and Karma, being enchanters that can exert some early game dominance, can look to shut down those melee supports before they are able to hit their massive Warmog spike. LeBlanc support is a really interesting pick right now who's gotten better this patch due to the Electrocute buffs. She's another pick that you can look to use against those melee supports, as you can really take advantage of the Electrocute cooldown buff against them. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top-tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it, guys, a complete look at the solo queue meta for every single role as we reach the midway mark of 14.13. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you back soon.